Oops. And welcome back to the Science Track at Con Carolinas via Continual. And so next up, we have Bad Science in Film and Fact. I'm Jim Nettles. I am both your Science Track Director as well as being the Continual Programming, Online Programming Director. And so I'm going to have my panelists introduce themselves.
Hey, I'm Darian Kennedy, doctor by day, novelist by night. I write contemporary fantasy and urban paranormal thrillers and mystery. And my day job is I'm a family physician. So I kind of straddle the two areas, and I'm looking forward to talking with this topic.
Hi, I'm Leanne Rattel. I'm also a family medicine physician, and I write young adult urban fantasy in the Conjuragic series, as well as paranormal mystery in the Hands of Time series.
I'm Les Gould. I'm a mechanical engineer by day, professional engineer for the last 20 years, mostly in building sciences, HVAC, that kind of thing, and accessibility. So, and I write in my spare time as well.
My name is Jim Craig. I am the sole proprietor of Planet of Mystery Productions, where I produce planetarium programs for museums and planetariums. I was a planetarium educator for more than 20 years and now have gotten very much recently into astrophotography.
Hi, I'm Charlie Kaufman. I'm an environmental scientist and emergency manager, and in my spare time, I like to combine all that information and look at how emergency managers might respond to fun things like Godzillas and Sharknadoes.
So just before we got started, we were having a little bit of fun talking about some extremely fun bad science, and we started off with Gilligan's Island. So we were looking at and talking about the fact that the professor actually practiced some good science as a part of Gilligan's Island, and the best thing that they could have possibly done was tie up or potentially roast Gilligan, and they'd have been off the island in episode 1 within 30 minutes. So I want to kind of start off with, how does everybody look at how do you define and look at science and film and fact, and what are the things that will let you suspend disbelief? Such as in Star Wars, the fact that all the space fighters fly based off of the physics of World War II movies, or what really will go and grab you and pull you out of the film or out of the book or something along those lines.
I think some of the fun things you have, so you have Star Wars, I cut my teeth on it. It was my favorite sci-fi movie. I totally get that you can't hear blasters and sci-fi explosions in space. I realize that's not possible, but I accept it as being part of that, and so I'm fully fine with it. I'll get that. My biggest problem is if I flip it over to Star Trek, is you hear the saying, oh, we're going to immediately jump to warp speed or do a hairpin turn, and none of these people go flying up against the wall and immediately get smashed because physics dictates that none of them are wearing seatbelts, which is actually, I think, one of the first jokes they made in Orville, was that they actually made that joke about having seatbelts or inertial dampeners in that. And that was the one thing that always bothered with me. The X-Wing pilots were all strapped in to deal with the G-forces that apparently were in the World War, fighters that they had. And in Star Trek, none of them were wearing that and should have been thrown against the bulkhead immediately. Things like that sort of stand out and stick in your mind, although I do love watching it just for those reasons.
I will mention this about something Charlie just said. They do say that they have inertial dampeners in the Enterprise. So, although, what good do they do? Because obviously people still get thrown out of chairs. But that aside, my Star Trek thing is the transporter. It's just not feasible. Can't be done. I'll let it go. Because, let's face it, you don't want to have to try to land the ship every time. Now, the thing that will take me out of a movie is when they get something absolutely just patently wrong that I know is wrong. The rest of the audience might not know it. And my wife has heard this one for years. In Stargate, the first Stargate film, they show the pyramid and they show 3 moons above it during the day. Okay, we've all seen the moon during the day. Not full, but they're all 3 full moons. And they're all Earth's moon, just turned in different directions. It's like, come on, you couldn't hire some guy, pay him $150 to paint pictures of the moon. The other one is in the first version of Total Recall. I actually left the theater when they showed the moons Phobos and Deimos above Mars, and there are these big round moons. The moons Phobos and Deimos are shaped like lumpy potatoes, and you can barely see them above the surface of Mars. They're very tiny. So it's like, no, I'm sorry. And the rest of it, I just didn't care. And yeah, it took me out of the movie so badly.
The fact that Arnold's head swole up like a balloon and then snapped back into shape was perfectly fine.
I'll get to
We'll
that
get back to that.
momentarily. I'll get to that momentarily.
Yeah.
But does that mean you've never heard the classic Arnold Schwarzenegger line from that movie, which is my favorite line from any movie ever?
Which one?
Come on, go Hagen, you got what you want. Give those people air. That's my favorite line of any movie ever.
That's even better than get to the chopper.
Get to the chopper.
I can't drink.
I'm actually really forgiving in movies, especially the further away from present day that they are. On the concept Star Wars, that's a completely fictional universe. They can pretty much do whatever they want. It doesn't bother me. It's stuff that's closer urban fantasy, I'd probably say, where I get hooked up more than anything. And that's, they're just doing things that physically don't happen in modern day world. Like where I was talking about building systems and entering buildings through duct systems when there's not, unless you're the size of an ant, you're not crawling in through the ductwork. And stuff like that will throw me out. But I'm usually very forgiving in movies and television and won't quite get up and walk away, but that's about it.
I'd say I'm probably pretty forgiving as well. But I think if you make the rules, you have to stick by them. So, I mean, even like a movie that is completely outlandish, like In Time with Justin Timberlake, where humanity, like we age normally till 25. And then after that, our aging process just halts. And then the rest of your life is time and its currency. So the people that are rich will have, like 1 million years to live, and the poor are literally working time to time. So everything that they buy is, money. So it'll, or time of their life. So it would be like, oh, I want to buy a Starbucks coffee. So that's 5 minutes off my life. Or, oh, but last week it was 4 minutes. Completely unfeasible in the realm of, like, I can't really imagine how that would ever really work, but I'll willingly spend my disbelief because you've set up the rules. But if then in the middle of it, which this doesn't happen in that movie, but then if later somebody ages to 40 without aging, then I'm like, you broke your rules. And so that's when you lose me. So I think I have more issues when it's not so much way out of bounds, but more like this could happen now. And it's like, but that's not how we do things. And if you're portraying it to be real, that's not real.
Do you think they did that with telomeres? Like when they put the little clock in your arm, they have a thing that resets your telomeres like every 24 hours so that you stay the same age? Because that's ultimately what ages you, is your telomeres and your DNA getting constantly recopied, and they get messed up over time. Mm-hmm. That's the only feasible. I was trying to think of how I would do that if I was writing that. To go back to the original question, I have to agree with Leanne 100%. Is that if you establish at the beginning of your thing what the rules are, you can make the rules whatever you want. And so if you have a thing set in, 2020 United States and you have a lightsaber, I'm like, well, maybe. But if you're like in Star Wars and you have a lightsaber, you're like, well, of course, it's Star Wars. And I think the reason, one of many reasons, but I think the main reason everybody got so upset with the prequels is because you take 3 movies establishing that the Force is a mysterious religion that nobody quite understands, and then all of a sudden you make it where it's mitochondria that are specific to Jedi 3 movies in. Oh, and all of a sudden they don't turn into ghosts when they die anymore, and you're like, that's not the rules of this universe. You've changed the rules of the universe, and that's what got everybody upset. So I think whatever your rules are is good. And then going back to sort of what Charlie said, I believe it's if you're set in 2020, unless science fiction-y stuff is a major part of what you're doing, you need to stick more or less with the tech we've got, maybe with a little bit of help. And so there's a lot of stuff like that. And then I'll come back to Arnold blowing up later because that's a very good example of something else, but I don't want to talk too long.
That's actually my biggest complaint about the new Star Trek episodes on the CBS All Access is that since they're all technically set pre the original series, those ships are so more high tech than Kirk's Enterprise that I'm like, this can't work. If you're saying the Enterprise was the high tech of the Federation of that time period than Spore Drive and flying around the galaxy on mold in a ship that's got better computers should not be allowed.
I think they actually addressed that at one point.
I quit watching. I don't care. I walked out. I walked out of the movie or stopped.
There's a point at which Pike was very upset with like the holographic viewer, and he says, "Just give me a view screen."
Yeah,
They actually refit the ship that he is on to be more like Kirk's Enterprise.
I
I haven't watched it.
I have a theory on that one, and this is what I call the 10-year theory of comic books, is that if you're reading, with the exceptions of characters like Magneto and Captain America, who are so firmly tied to World War II, basically one of my theories on reading comics or watching a television show is you are watching whatever's happening through the lens of the best that the person producing it at the time could do. And in your own mind, when you read like an issue of X-Men from the 1960s, and then you read it in 2020, and you're trying to figure out why Scott Summers isn't 80 years old, and why are they talking about stuff, is that time in a comic book or a movie is now, and it kind of has to filter through the best understanding that the writer can do at that time. So that's my theory, is that if the original Star Treks were made today, it wouldn't look like that, but that was just the best they could produce at the time. But I do hear your complaint.
With a cardboard budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the things. So if we compare the difference between film or TV at the time versus books, we still see a lot of comparable issues, because technology that we consider every day, even now, people were saying would be cutting edge in 300 years or 500 years or something. So if we look at, and let's sort of start playing with earth sciences. So if we're looking at things like the earth sciences, one of the big ones for me that I looked at, and even though I watched it, I sat through the whole thing, was the core. The idea of, hi, we're going to drive a hot rod drill all the way to the core of the planet. We're going to set off some nukes, and we're going to start spinning the core again thing. Like, it is a cue ball going to the side pocket. And I watched that, and I remember going, as they're somewhere way down deep in the planet, they're like, yeah, I got to go out and change a spare tire. I'll be right back. And I mean, they're hopping out without environmental suits. They're hopping out without anything. And I'm looking at this going, please tell me it was a 5-year-old that was a science advisor for this show. Please tell me this was a 5-year-old. So when I saw things like that from an earth sciences standpoint, or even Volcano, going back with, I think it was Tommy Lee, and yeah, I mean, some of these things like this that are presented to be hard science and science fiction, no.
Volcano, first movie to have an emergency manager in it, so let's say.
And nobody listened to him.
No, so he pops out of the ground and said, you know, this is the best line in movies, is he pops out of the manhole cover and says, "Get me a scientist," you know.
I think a lot of movies are made without a science advisor. And I'll be honest about that. You see, you know, science fiction, every once in a while you'll see a science fiction movie where they do something right, and they do happen. But then you see so many of them, it's like, you guys just came up with this plot. You didn't ask anybody, is this even at all plausible? Could this happen at all? And with earth sciences especially, and what people think volcanoes do versus what volcanoes really do are two different things entirely. I mean, they like the big visual ones with all the lava. We were just talking, we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of Mount St. Helens. It did not spew the big bright orange flame out everywhere. It just fell off.
If you want a good comedic read, the last big earthquake movie thing was like, had The Rock in it that destroyed Los Angeles.
Yeah. Sure.
The head of the USGS did a live tweet stream while she was watching it, and she started off the movie with like the one fact that they got right, and it went downhill from there. And it is the funniest thing to read. And she thinks she was doing it for a charity event, but it is great. She's like, "Yeah, you're right. When you feel the earth shake, you should get under something solid." And then it just went downhill straight, and it's fantastic. You know?
So let me ask a question about that then. So when we see things like that that are such bad representations of the science. Um, and yet they're still fun because it's one of those things of you get to watch something and go, oh, yeah, that's not how that works. As long as they're making it fun, though. Do you think it serves anything when they address small bits of actual real science in film and things like that, even if they make it fun and if it's all wrong, instead of ones that really try to get it right? Like, oh, of course, I just went blank. Matthew McConaughey, where they mapped out the black hole using the map or using the math. And the image of the black hole they used in the film was they said, yes, this looks
That's not Interstellar, is it?
yeah, Interstellar.
Interstellar.
As I started talking, I get blank, and I was like, of course I didn't write a note about that. So
My biggest problem with that one was the time loop.
Yeah.
He had to go into the black hole in order to give the information that gave the key to solving the issue at the beginning of the movie. But sorry, that's off topic. What was your question?
well, I mean, so if you're looking at things like that, do you think that even if it is good science, bad science, it's one of those things that engages people to get interested in what's the science versus the story? So I mean, as kids, we all watch science fiction, and that's what pulled a lot of people into the sciences was what's real, what's not, and being a tool and a mechanism. So how do you guys feel about that? Even if it's bad science, does it generate interest for people to come and then we sit here and heckle it?
Having two teenage kids, I can say it's I mean, we all do it. We watch a movie like, can that really happen? And they'll pull out their, and there they go with Google now. Granted, they're Googling, so it's going to question your resources there as well. But the fact that they're being interested in whether or not what they're being shown on a movie is actually feasible, to that extent that they're willing to go research it, that's a good thing, whether it's good science or bad science in the movie itself.
To go back to Arnold Schwarzenegger's eyes literally popping out of his head as they're putting an atmosphere on Mars at the end of Total Recall, I don't think that's what really happens when a body's in a vacuum. B, once the eyes are out of your head, check me on this, Dr. Rattel, but they don't automatically pop back in when the atmosphere is okay. Is that right?
And even if they happen to, you would probably sever the retinal nerve, so you'd be blind whether they went back in or not. And so yeah. Whenever I talk on panels constantly at conventions about dead is dead, and what always takes me out of movies, even though watching Arnold Schwarzenegger getting basically squeezed like Play-Doh was pretty interesting to watch. What always takes me out is when you've done something to your character which would just flat out kill them. They're not wounded, injured, or maimed. They're just flat out dead. And then 5 minutes later, not only are they still alive, but they're fine. That always kind of bugs me. Now, from a Total Recall thing, I always kind of wondered if that miraculous recovery just meant that they were still in the mind game and was just a continuation of the mind game. And I've always kind of wondered that.
That would take care of my problem, because it could just be that they put them in the mind game and somebody got the science wrong in that, rather than the movie having the science wrong.
Well, the whole point of that mind game was that he was put in as the indestructible hero of a story, and he's going to, in the end, he was going to defeat the bad guy and save the girl. And so if you play it to its natural end, if he's still in the fantasy world created by the Total Recall machine, that's how that story ends. But then you're like, he's still in the machine, which I think is kind of an interesting ending.
A better ending.
It's a better ending.
So for entertainment value, I remember, especially talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Last Action Hero movie, where they made fun of all the stuff that, characters can survive and things that they can do and not physically be able to do, and they use it in an entertaining way. I thought that was a good example of bad science but making fun of itself for it.
Let me throw this out there as a question then. Have we now found a lot of the time bad science has become a trope?
Absolutely. There are some things that we just accept. Something I was thinking about this morning when I was thinking about the panel, something that is in almost every science fiction series, gravity plating, or some way of inducing gravity into a spaceship. People walk on floors. And I understand it's because making people float around realistically is expensive, but it can't be done. We saw it done as early as the early 1950s with Destination Moon, George Powell movie based on Robert Heinlein's story. they had everybody suspended on wires, but instead of hanging the wires down, they put the wires on the side. So you're looking for them up here. You don't notice them because they're over on the side, and they just turn the camera sideways, which is actually kind of clever. But yeah, I think, when I think about things like gravity plating, and it's just an accepted thing. And it bugs me because, I'm sorry, gravity is just not that easy.
You guys just put the word quantum in front of everything now, don't you?
Yeah.
I don't like how they use satellites. How, we can use a satellite and pinpoint no matter the time of day or angle of the Earth or any of that, and we can zoom right in on, what you're doing, and can zoom in your living room until you're drinking your, black coffee.
Yeah, we've got this grainy footage from the drive-through camera. Oh, look, we can tell this guy's got a pimple on his earlobe.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It always starts out grainy, and they're like, "Can we refine that?" I'm like,
No.
With what?
You got 1 pixel for the whole license plate.
Well, I mean, that's the ones that obviously drive me nuts, is when you're looking at the technology side of things. When somebody comes in and we're going to crack in and we're going to hack, we're going to hack the super data center and we're going to do all this and this. And I'm like, number one, most breaches are not because you've got the super genius or the 12-year-old in the basement running a cracking key against it. There are technologies that do that, but most of the breaches come because of human stupidity. Someone falls for the phishing, somebody and opens the keys to the kingdom for them on their behalf. That's the reason we see tons of junk email and spam links is out there in the hopes that, some small number of people will click on it and then somebody gets to go scoop all of their info. You see I'm going to plug. Yes, Jim. Thank you. We know your password. And remind everyone, it's a capital P for yours.
Man, now I have
1,
to change
2,
my
3,
password.
4, 5.
Yeah.
Remind me to change the password on my luggage.
Yeah.
Password on their
Les just stole my joke. Password on my luggage.
Hey, now there's one where when the ship stopped, Dark Helmet reaped the rewards.
I mean,
Yeah.
for me, one of my number one moments of bad science, as much fun as the film is, Independence Day, because Max can interface with all alien technology, which proves absolutely without a doubt Steve Jobs was an alien. So, but that was the one I looked at, was they're still using monitors and Apple interfaces with it. I can barely get Apple sometimes to talk to Windows, but it's going to work with an alien technology and an alien system.
I haven't seen that one in a long time. Was there an explanation for how they were able to write a virus for a
Alien software.
computer language that no one had ever seen before?
Nope.
Well, they did have the scout ship sitting there that they hadn't been able to power up, so it's not like they've been getting the source code.
Right. If they had somehow downloaded the source code from that ship onto the Mac, then I would buy it, but they never said that.
They simply just told them that they had a whole bunch of gold that they had to transfer into their account, and then
They used the Nigerian prince thing. Hello, people from outer space. I am a Nigerian prince.
and I need to.
If I click on this link, I can get my tentacle enlarged.
Yes.
And that is probably the entire reason for the invasion, was because they intercepted a Nigerian prince email scam. They sent their Bitcoins and they were coming back because they never got the shipment delivered.
And
I
the
think
tentacle
victims.
enlarged.
it would be a good example of that. Even though the science is there, it was really a fun movie. So
Yes,
Yeah,
Jim.
I'm glad, man. I despise that.
Yes, we know. It's okay to be the curmudgeon. So
There are movies I like.
the second one though got me, where the doctor guy that had the tentacle
haven't.
around his neck, where he was like, no peace, no
Oh.
peace. And like he was dead, and then in the
That's
second one,
fine.
like, oh, he didn't really die. Like,
that was the political answer. Yeah. Yeah, I still haven't seen the second one. I couldn't bring myself to do it. So let's talk about medical science. Yeah, I knew I'd see the evil glint in the eyes over here. If you're writing police procedurals, we all know that DNA can be run in 30 minutes in the field from
30 minutes,
from
not
an
30
iPhone.
seconds.
Yeah.
Dominoes.
Okay. Well, all right. It's a 30 seconds because I've got an iPhone out, and I just wave it over the top, and then it goes, "Did you know that this is so and so's son? why he didn't know he was so-and-so's son, or whatever the case may be. So from a medical sciences side, what are the sort of things that really are going to grab you and send you spinning off into, it's going to unravel your DNA?
For me, it's when they actually do like have medical procedures or, policies in place and, they get it wrong. Like, they intubate somebody and they put in the tube and then they start grabbing other stuff. And I'm like, no, you don't let go of the tube until it's all secure. So things like that, I'm like, nope. And it just pulls me right out of the story. Or, they give them any kind of, the antibiotic, but nobody ever has any, reactions to antibiotics. Like nobody's, ever sick to their stomach or getting rashes or none of that. It just immediately give them like one dose and they're totally better.
Other than the one that I talked about before where dead people are just dead and you can't fix dead. The big one for me that always gets me is in an hour-long television show, at least twice per season, what they will do, especially if it's like a superhero show or a bunch of different genres do this, is they will poison or injure or do something to someone at about 15 minutes in, and then they're really, really sick. And then 5 minutes before the end of the episode, someone goes into the back room and comes out with a vial of blue liquid and says, we have created the antidote/cure for whatever the thing was for that particular episode. And I'm like, so you can make a cure for something that's never had a cure before in an hour. That always bugs me. But the biggest thing is, what is the machine that you have that you just happen to have on site at the place where you work that makes this magical blue liquid that can cure anything? Because I want one of those at my job. That would be so helpful. Oh my gosh, your leg fell off? Hang on, give me an hour. I'll be right back. Drink this blue liquid. Oh my gosh, look, new leg. Wouldn't that be great, Leanne?
Yeah, it's like big fat Greek wedding, just put some Windex on it.
Oh my gosh, is that what that stuff is?
Is it the color blue that's the healing color? It's the color blue.
It's always blue. Poisons are green and cures are blue. Watch TV. True for 20 years going now.
People who get CPR, first of all, CPR is never done properly on television because you don't want to break people's ribs.
This is true.
Or stop someone's heart. And
Puppy.
they cough, they sit up, and then they walk away like everything's just fine and dandy. And it doesn't work like that at all.
And then I can pick up my weapon to go fight 30 seconds later?
Yep.
Oh, I feel much better. Oh, that hurt. Yeah, I feel much better now. So looking at the medical side of things as well, I mean, there's the who's dead. But I mean, one of the challenges I know we all know as creators is that idea that you've got to keep the story going along and I need the info. And so I'm going to misuse the science. I'm going to use DNA coming back from a lab that's understaffed, underfunded. They're going to do it in a half an hour because I need to know where the guy is, because advertisers are still only going to pay for an hour of the story or 42 minutes. So when you see that, things like that we've got to keep a story moving along and balancing that out. So if we look at it then for the engineering, the science, the technology that's grabbed and pulled in that is often misused, misstated, or absolutely just, tanked up, what's the one thing that you've seen that pushes you over the edge, that you always look, that people tend to believe is real?
Well, we'll go to something Darren was mentioning earlier. People bloating or exploding in space or freezing solid instantly. That's a constant thing we see in science fiction movies all the time. Anytime somebody's exposed to a vacuum, they pop like a balloon. Or if they're exposed to the cold of space, they freeze solid. And just knowing anything about black body radiation, it takes a lot longer. Put a pot roast in their freezer and see how long it takes to freeze. It doesn't do it instantly. You can put a pot roast in liquid nitrogen where you have contact. It still will not freeze solid instantly. It takes a long time to go through that much because you got a lot of heat to exchange. And with as far as exploding goes, we're only talking a difference of 15 pounds per square inch. That's not enough to make something, pop. Despite that, I still like the movie Outland.
I know it's what bugs me about that, and I realize is just labs take so long, even if they're staffed, with all the funding. And knowing what I know about labs now is that they are understaffed and underfunded. And I do try to have to just hold my tongue and skip that little bit. And we're like, oh, well, we sent that to the lab. We'll get it back in an hour or 30 minutes, or we put a rush on it. We should have it shortly. And I'm like, no, I know that's not how it works. That every single person out there has put a rush on their particular order, and there's some poor lab tech with a drawer of evidence or samples stacked up, and he's just pulling them as fast. And this poor, the PCRs and all the equipment have to run a complete cycle. So it's cool. And I know that, you're only following like the one case for the episode or the movie, but that always bugs me when they're that one key piece of evidence or the cure or whatever they're running, gets done as quickly as it happens.
It's kind of on the same thing. I mean, you would think after what we've gone through in the last 2 months that hopefully a lot more people have a more realistic expectation of what you can do when you're faced with an unknown virus and how long it takes to develop the lab processes. I mean, it's not like going into the back room and developing a cure in an hour. It's, we got months, and we're still having a test that's not very accurate, and we're nowhere closer to a cure. So, I mean, we have a real life example right now in the last 2 months on how a virus and how badly we've treated the medical profession in representation in science fiction.
Well, I think we found the problem here that will help with the cure. They've not colored it blue yet. So if we ship them some blue,
They've been coloring it the wrong thing.
Well, along the same lines, it would be how quickly we can also get a vaccine, because they take long periods of time. Just because they can make a vaccine doesn't mean it's effective, doesn't mean it's safe. But I thought the movie Contagion, I thought it did pretty well with most of the science and the process involved, how, they had to get a facility to start quarantining, positive patients, how they ran out of body bags and all that. But the thing that aggravated me is like at the end, one, we got a cure really quickly, or not a cure, but a vaccine really quickly. Second of all, it shows her injecting it in herself, and she's like, okay, well, we're not getting non-live viruses. We have to have live attenuated, and she's injecting herself. But then when they start releasing it to the public, which again, they do show that it takes like a year to get enough, but it's been less than that before they even get a vaccine. So that aggravates me. But then when they start giving it out, it's an intranasal vaccine. And I'm like, at least you could have done the same thing. Plus, when she injects herself, she and then immediately goes to visit her dad and takes off her mask. And I'm like, you're not immune yet. It takes like 2 weeks after you get a vaccine to build up immunity. But she apparently is immune right away. If they wouldn't have done those things, I think it would have been a better movie.
Was the vaccine blue?
Blue. No, it was clear in the needle, and then I think they showed a color in the intranasal one. But they had to do 2, one on each side.
Well, that's why it didn't work. Gotta be blue. And I forget which actress it is, but at the end of Outbreak, which had Dustin Hoffman, but they're like right. It's the same thing I've talked about 100 times. But they're right up to the wire, and she's like on the edge of death, and then they get whatever they're putting into her, and then like almost instantly she's fine. And I'm like, you'd probably administer the cure or whatever you have, and then you put that person in the ICU for a few days and let their body heal. But whenever you pour the stuff in, it's not like it's vaccines and stuff in the movies can almost act like magic. And that's a little bit not right. The one that I was going to actually talk about was just the general expectation of what physicians can do, period, based on not just science fiction and fantasy shows, but House and Grey's Anatomy and ER. What we've trained an entire public to do is think that you can come to me and say, I have blah, 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 and blah, and then I can think about it, do a physical exam, run tests, and in 46 minutes, not including commercials, I can say, you have blah, and we are going to do blah, and then you're going to be better. And sometimes we can do that, but sometimes we can't. And every once in a while, it would have been nice if we got to the end of an episode of House and House said, you know what, guys, I just don't know. that doesn't make good television, but it's just true because sometimes we just don't know.
The lack of failures represented in science fiction is unfortunate because even medical, regular science, I mean, we try a lot of things before we find the right thing.
I will give credit to the Martian. He blows his eyebrows out, and I like it when he's talking. He still has smoke curling out of his hair. He failed at something. And it's like, good, it's nice to see that happen because it really does.
So that actually brings up an interesting question, because one of those things that we sometimes see with House, I mean, you know the formula. It's almost the reverse of a police procedural, where it's step 1 fail, step 2 fail, step 3 fail. We almost kill the patient. Step 4, oh, miracle, because we've got to hit the beats. You know, Star Trek has sometimes been known to show, oh, this failed, but this is going to work. Other times it just shows this failed and you screwed up and we've got to figure out how to deal with this. And I think that's one of the things that, if I especially look at the original series, they did a lot of, because of course it was an ethical drama about, do we want to use AI? Do we want to engage in some things like this? When we look, are we also looking at times where there's the sociological side of science, where people still fear science because they fear what they don't understand, or they fear what they misunderstand about the sciences that are brought to them? And so, you know, and like Charlie, if I look at, because you like to do stuff with the kaijus, you know, if Godzilla showed up out of the water, where is Godzilla coming from? I mean, we all have to suspend a little bit of disbelief that the old ones are popping up through, you know, some sort of dimensional rift in the bottom of the ocean.
Finland, right?
Okay. Well, I mean, in my talks, and like I did this, you can Google it still. They mapped Monster Island in the middle of the Pacific. You know, of course they all just live together until they get an urge to come visit for some reason. You know,
I have had enough. I'm getting out of here.
I'm gonna go. You know,
Hydra ate one too many of Mothra's eggs, and now it's on.
Yeah, it's like, if I'm up for a Starbucks, guys, who wants to come join me? You know,
what kind of Starbucks drink does Godzilla drink?
The Venti, the super.
It's got to be a Venti something.
Yeah,
and it comes with a side of Karens because they're crunchy.
I think with a lot of that, you've got to look like they pop up. It's not like, all right, they've shown up. You know, for whatever reason, they're attacking. You know, they're pissed off. They're stopping the buildings. I love the reactions to the people as to why they're doing it. I love is like about all those movies is for as bad as you can make them, is that the military has this amazing response that they can roll tanks down these streets to like shoot at them that quickly, and that never could possibly happen like as fast as it occurs. You know, it's like, oh, Godzilla occurs. It's like if he's coming out of the local harbor and he's stomping on the city, you know, you can say the local emergency management, the police chief is like this giant lizard is, you know, has just come up with stomping, and the local person, like the military guy's like, crank collar, hang up, click. You know, it's gonna take a while for that information to trickle down. Like there's several chains of command going up. So that always amuses me, how quickly like the military suddenly rolls into the tanks and starts shooting, you know.
It would be like if they had like a stash of tanks in Wilmington, North Carolina, just sitting there just in case Godzilla ever comes out of the Atlantic Ocean.
It's, you know, it's the emergency management stashes. I haven't seen that yet, you know. It's like
I'm former Air National Guard. They can mobilize fast. You'd be amazed. Maybe not 20 minutes. You know, it's not like ordering a pizza, 30 minutes or less.
Whoa.
But I know that our unit could be anywhere in the world and set up within 36 hours.
But it's a call of like, I used to live in Wilmington. Wilmington would be pretty much flat by the time, you know, they got it.
I was in an armor unit in the military, and I know that every time when I actually deployed, I was not. But whenever I was my first 2 years in the Army, I was with 110 Cavalry, and when we would go out to the desert of California for a training exercise, I mean, it takes a while just to load up the train because you put all the tanks on the train and then you take them there and then you got to unload them. I mean, you could do that pretty fast, but I agree. It would take a minute to get you there and get all set up and ready to rock.
Well, the initial response would be about protecting the next city, not the one that initially got attacked.
Right. So, you know, they might like back up, but the first city that gets hit, that's flattened.
So we send the tanks to Charleston.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
I want to know what Tokyo did to make them so mad.
Yeah.
Also, New York.
Well, there's lots of tasty snacks in, automatically wrapped up city.
What I liked about the Cloverfield movie is that it was told from the point of view from the lay people when like big monster comes. So it's definitely an interesting take. Of course, we usually are always like with the military who's dealing with it, or the scientist who already knew it was coming, or is the only person there that can decipher, kind of like Jeff Goldblum in Independence Day. That's what I liked about that one. It was just like people like, what in the world's going on? And all you see is like a glimpse of a leg. And so I thought that was an interesting take.
I was just thinking about that same movie.
Mhm.
Yeah. The poor person is like, oh my God,
The person making the call, like, Godzilla's outside?
Yeah. I
What do
think
I do?
there's a
H.P.
giant
Lovecraft just came through.
So if we look at, so that kind of brings up a question. At what point do we separate bad science or the quote unquote science being presented in a film from its magic? How do we, at what point do we kind of start to go and say, we need it to be this, the science is this over here, but we're going to use that for our way of solving this problem. So is that one of those things that becomes forgivable?
I think a great example of that, and I freely admit, I love this movie. It's Crawl, that came out, was it 2 years ago now, about the people that were trapped in the hurricane and got attacked by the alligators. That's a popcorn movie. I love it. Watch it. It's hilarious. It's supposed to be a horror movie. I was laughing the entire time. That's probably because of my background in environmental and emergency sciences. The protagonist does every single thing in that movie wrong, and everything that happens in that movie from an emergency standpoint is false. So I know that there's no way she should have survived by the end of it. So I loved when every so often somebody at the end was like, hey, did you see that movie? What did you think? I was able to answer them on what actually would have happened. So I tell people, it's like, if you're going to be stupid enough to drive into an area that's being evacuated from a giant hurricane, and if you're going to drive around a barricade, and you're going to stand in an area that's flooding with a storm surge, the alligator deserves to eat you.
You have it coming.
Yeah, if you call 911 for help during the storm, they're not coming. If you climb up onto the roof during the Category 5 winds, the helicopter is not going to come pluck you off. You're alligator bait.
Are you saying Sharknado is not a documentary?
Yeah, I wish it was. That film, it just warms my heart.
So let me.
2020, it could happen.
Yeah, I know. The rest of the year is still open.
I think one of my favorite quotes for all creators is the one that goes, don't discount the idea that you want to write, because somewhere at some point in history, someone sat in a room and was like, here it is, a tornado with sharks in it. And now we've got how many, 5 movies?
I got some of the best comments and feedback on my report on Sharknado after I gave it to a bunch of people from FEMA that said, well, you really need to think about this and this. And so I had to adapt and redo some of my edits. So
That's funny.
Well, I think, with the science being forgivable also is in how you're presenting it. So like Sharknado, I'm not gonna lie, I love shark movies. That's my trope thing. Okay, if you have a shark in it, I'm watching it. But Sharknado, you forgive the science because it's so outlandish, and it's like they're purposely making it amusing as opposed to scary, whereas something like Deep Blue Sea, which is we're gonna make these sharks smarter and stuff. We're a serious shark movie and we want to really scare you and be real science. And so while it's pretty scary movie, as far as being believable, no, but they're trying to make it believable. So I think that's where Deep Blue Sea fails, whereas Sharknado is so outlandish that it's just funny. We go, okay, we'll come along with you, and that's why there's 5 movies.
I think Sharknado harkens back to the very first question of the panel of, if you establish in your rules right up front that a tornado can have sharks in it, it's fine. You're going to totally watch that movie because that's in the rules of the movie. But if in the second movie you're like, sharks can't be in tornadoes, then you're like, wait, you've changed the rules. That's bad.
You're talking about science that borders on magic, The Abyss.
Oh,
Oh, I love that.
So
movie.
much of that. People not getting decompression sickness. Although the dumbest thing is the thing that bothered me the most is when they come face to face with these underwater aliens and the alien blinks. Things that are born and live underwater and don't breathe air don't have eyelids. And that just bugged me so much.
You're assuming that they're not aliens from outer space that have adapted to being underwater.
It's
Well-
the salt in their eyes. They need to get the salt out of there.
Which I also get a little bit bothered when they show a highly technological civilization with all these all the machinery and everything underwater, because you can't do metallurgy underwater, and you can't do electronics underwater.
See, you're bugged. You're bugged by them having eyelids. I'm still looking at the Submariner from Marvel Comics, and I'm like, why do people who are like underwater have microscopic wings on their heels that allow them to fly? Because I'm still like, this makes no sense. You've got ankle bones with wings that belong on birds, but you evolved underwater. That's like
Flying fish.
I'm more bugged by the abyss where, there's this advanced technological society and they're underwater and they're essentially like jellyfish quality, but we're going to raise our entire civilization and bring you all up and save you all. But what are they doing? Are they just laying there and they killed their whole world? Where did they go?
Back into space, because they came from space. They just were.
Scotty beam them up then?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't establish that, though.
No, they did not.
They changed their own rules.
Yes, they
change
did.
the rules. Good point.
They changed their rules to solve the problem. I actually have a couple of friends that worked on that film because a lot of the underwater stuff was shot in Greenville.
That's cool.
In the nuclear reactor that never started up there, they filled it up with water and did all the underwater stuff there.
Yeah, and the cooling tanks.
Mm-hmm.
I think Earl Owensby, the Dixie DeMille from Shelby, is the one who bought that. It's probably the most money he ever made on a movie.
So let's go back towards things that feel more real, more practical. So I'm going to pick on Les a little bit here from the engineering side of things. So when we're watching a film and we're watching things that feel more real, more practical, let's go to like the heist films. We're seeing somebody come up and pick a lock in seconds and things like that you can do. And then, as we were talking about before we got started, the skylight that highlights the royal gemstone that is the most valuable thing on the entire planet at that exact moment in time. And we're going to shine down upon it to make it easy to be stolen because a couple of lasers are going to protect it. So, when we look at things like that in film that look practical, and sometimes you can look at that and say, well, yes, the science would work for that. However, all the other logic says you would never actually do that or apply the science in that way.
Right.
If you're looking at that from a security perspective, the first thing you're going to go is fix that.
We're not going to display this here because that's one of the things that does push me out of movies. When the practicality of a layout is overlooked for the use of a crutch on the movie in order to make it work. Whether it's the skylight to enter in through, I need to listen in on a conversation, so let me crawl into the ductwork in the bathroom, which doesn't usually have a big supply duct, and I'm going to crawl through the ductwork halfway across the building and listen in on a private conversation in a small room through ductwork that's not designed to support weight. It's not big enough to crawl into. A lot of that pushes me out a lot of times in movies. So that when the practicality of the engineering or the layouts is overlooked, that bugs me. There's one scene in the I don't know if you ever watched the TV series Scorpion. It's supposed to be a bunch of geniuses, and it's supposed to have a genius guy doing all the making sure everything works. And they walk into a bombed out room. And the guy pulls out a pad and says, well, this is what the ductwork system would have looked like. And there's nothing left of the ductwork system. It's like, it's almost all art, how you lay out a duct system. I mean, you talk to 10 different guys, you'd have 20 different designs. So the fact that you walk in and say, this is what it'll look like, that bugs me. And that actually, I stopped watching that series because of the flagrant misuse of engineering.
So how do you feel then about Jeffries tubes?
Jeffries tubes. That's
Star
another-
Trek. That's the name. That's what you call all the tubes that run all over the Enterprise, and all those things are the Jeffries tubes. That's the engineering hatches.
Actually, that almost makes sense because there's going to be inaccessible or poorly accessible aspects. I've never been on a submarine, so I don't know to compare it. But I would imagine there's got to be interstitial. If you do have if you have gravity plating to make decks so you can actually come down, then there's going to be interference between decks, and the Jeffrey tubes would be something that you would have to use to access the places you need to get to less often. So they're not infeasible, though I think Star Trek overused them.
Way before Kirk ever came along, the ducts were much smaller, and this poor guy named Jeffrey got stuck in one of those. And so ever since then, they built them a little
They've
bit
been larger.
bigger and called them Jeffrey's tubes.
I'm going to fly my nerd flag here.
Yeah.
Jeffrey tube is named after Matt Jeffries, one of the guys who designed the set. And if you watch on there, you'll actually see pipes on the Enterprise, and this is in pretty much, they say GNDN, which stands for goes nowhere, does nothing.
Nice.
Well, I mean, a Jeffries tube, as far as accessing, that's deliberately designed for access, makes sense.
Yeah.
If those were designed for flowing plasma or something else throughout the ship, and then you just drain it and then use it for an access, that doesn't make sense.
I would say for technology, it would be endless ammo.
And cell phones that never die. I want Jack Bauer's cell phone and his data plan.
Well, the phone never dies and it never gets shot. It never breaks when he falls and drops. It never. I mean, that's an OtterBox for you right there.
Stops bullets too when necessary.
Yeah, you were talking about science. This is just, this isn't in science fiction. This is fiction in general. Hiding behind something that is clearly not bulletproof and not getting shot.
Yeah, like that Formica table, that the little cheap ass table in the in a residential trailer. That's not going to stop anything.
They're firing 50 caliber rounds into a trailer.
It goes through the wall of the trailer, but not the table inside the trailer.
That's what I was going to bring up. I'm going to hide behind the couch, and I'm going to be okay, even though they're shooting straight through both sides of the trailer.
That's why you buy a good couch.
I've never bought a couch that's bulletproof. I'm going to have to look for that specification next time.
It's the Kevlar coating that makes it.
I buy all my furniture at Bed, Kevlar, and Beyond.
Or you could be Indiana Jones and hide in the refrigerator while a nuclear bomb blows off and save yourself from the radiation when you open the door.
Thank you for finally going there.
Yeah. You do know that's become the new jump the shark is nuke the fridge.
I mean, refrigerators, they were a lot more steady and a little bit hailer back then. But yeah, I'm not buying the fact that that's going to save me from a nuke.
Well,
Notice said it was lead lined, and it's like, I don't think anybody ever lead lined a refrigerator.
Wouldn't it have still been hot on the outside when he got out of it?
In more ways than one.
Yeah.
That's why it's good to be the hero.
Yeah.
But the good news is the aliens at the end cured him of everything. So as we look at, since the one thing we really haven't hit on much is space. So you look at things that have been raised to be pinnacles of science fiction, like 2001: A Space Odyssey. The technology that was used at the time and how much of it has come about to be, versus the things that, of course, they knew that they were stretching the bounds even back then. But I mean, if you look at the things that were regarded as much harder science as they went in, we see the teleconferencing, we see tablets, we don't see Pan Am now, but it could have been. When we look at things, what do we see that is good science? And a lot of the time, the good science is so subtle that you have to be looking for it to pick it up. What do you see in terms of the good science to sort of balance out all the stuff we've been riffing on?
Let's go back to 2001, and there have been movies done since then. 2001, watch it. Most of the screens are flat screens. You don't have a lot of CRTs. Alien, I loved movie Alien. I think it's probably the best horror movie made in the last 40 years. Sorry, 42 years. Everything's CRTs. Blade Runner, everything's CRTs, but 2001 had flat screens. And, you see the occasional CRT in it, but not very often. And when I actually watched it recently, it holds up. I mean, that movie is 52 years old, and it holds up. They did a really good job with it.
I'll say one thing about with Blade Runner and some of the scenes outside was especially when he's running down the outside scenes when he's chasing the replicants. A lot of that advertising where it was overwhelming even then. I was in New York City even a couple of years ago, and Times Square, you can't even see the buildings anymore for the amount of stuff they put out there. And whether that's just the action following fiction or whatever, but it's reminded me a lot of that.
With the big Atari sign.
Yeah.
Mine is a book series. It's We Are Legion, We Are Bob by Dennis E. Taylor. So the premise of that story is, again, you have to suspend your disbelief, but it starts off with a guy, main character at a con. So it was fun to kind of see people talking about like, oh, there's like the stormtroopers walking by, but he pays to have his body frozen for when he dies. So when technology catches up, they can rebuild him one, and he ends up waking up X amount of years in the future, and instead of them rebuilding his body, they have taken his brain and made him into a computer and put him in a spaceship and sent him out to space to make copies of himself. So We Are Bob, because his name is Bob, and to, fly around the universe. And so it's interesting how he doesn't have certain technology things that he then ends up making over the course of the series. So like, for instance, like he does a thing where he can talk to his other selves, even though they're light years apart, because over several hundred years, he's made a new technology and then shares it with everybody and makes a network. And so I really like the science behind it. I'm sure if the actual tech people read it, it would probably be full of stuff that's wrong, but I felt it was written well enough to where I didn't immediately pick up on it.
I'm trying to think of any good examples where I've seen it used very well. The Martian was a good one of kind of close future, so where they were able to implement similar technologies, slingshotting around planets in order to kind of speed up and get to where they needed to, though the recovery was a little questionable. But I'm trying to think of the name of the story, but there was one about beaming power from solar panels, and then you microwave beam them down to Earth rather than trying to do the cables. That was a technology I think that's still being looked at today. So there's some technology out there that's in science fiction that's being brought into reality, and I think it's always going to happen.
I think there's been a gazillion articles written about how Star Trek predicted almost everything technological that came over the following 20 to 30 years. I think that they sort of came up with flip phones, they came up with pagers, they came up with CDs, they came up with the iPad, decades before those things were real. And there's a lot of, and I'm always interested in reading articles where it's that science fiction is not necessarily just making stuff up. It's actually like doing your best to predict what's coming. And when someone gets it right, they are inventing something, even though they didn't maybe necessarily invent at the time a functioning one, but the idea for the iPad did not come from Steve Jobs. That was out there. 20 years earlier, Picard's walking around with an iPad in his hand pretty much every episode. And Star Trek's just one example of many where science fiction pointed exactly where we were going.
Yeah, well, the LCARs and all that sort of stuff they were doing, Star Trek, brought a lot of fun tech, and I think in some ways inspired some of what we see, and that's where I think Star Trek's been credited a lot. What is the one piece of bad science that you really kind of wish was real?
Warp drive.
Yeah.
Well, but that may not be bad science.
Yeah, well,
there's work being done on it now.
Yeah, I just read an article on it.
I've read a lot of articles. It doesn't mean it's coming to pass.
It may take another 100 years. But trust me, I'd love to have that, and I'd love to have a transporter, because God knows I'd love to be able to just go from point to point.
I want the blue liquid maker. I'll share with you, Leanne. We'll like have a co-office.
I want you to have the blue liquid maker.
Mm-hmm.
So do I, because I'll run the business side for you.
How about the cellular regeneration machine they used in The Fifth Element? That would have been nice. All you need is one cell, and you can recreate the entire body with memories.
Yeah, with memories. More important.
I believed I was promised flying cars by this point. I still want my flying car.
People can't drive in 2 dimensions. Don't give them a third one.
No, I want the flying cars.
Flying.
You see the way people drive. Do you want that over your house?
No, I want to be the only one with a flying car.
What everybody wants is
I
to
didn't
be
say
the
you
one
could have
person
a
who
flying
has
car. I
a
want my
flying car. They want everybody else to stay on the ground, and everybody else wants their one flying car, and everybody else is on the ground.
A jetpack would be nice.
Personal jetpack.
Yeah.
That lasts more than 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Does it singe your heels?
Yeah.
I was looking at a picture. I don't know if y'all know who Matt Wagner is, but Matt Wagner, he was the creator of Mage and Grendel and some other comics back in the 80s. He's doing like a sketch a day on Facebook right now. But one of his sketches a week or two ago was The Rocketeer. And I was looking at it, I was like, that's a really cool picture, but how does the Rocketeer still have a butt? I mean, it should have been roasted off. I mean, you can wear the most heat-resistant pants you want, but I got news for you, man. Your buttocks are gone.
At least slow roasted.
Don't pick on The Rocketeer. No, that's a movie that I actually really like.
I loved The Rocketeer. That was such a good
So
movie.
much fun.
The technology that I would like is like transcendence, where you can put your entire personality and memories in a computer, so that way you never lose any of your family or friends, even if you can like pull them up on the computer and talk to them that way. And
There's a whole lot of plugs I would pull and a whole lot of hard drives I would erase.
And the panel went dark.
and would that be murder or
Jim, that's called
I want to
premeditation.
talk to everyone forever. And then, I want to kill everyone right now.
Jim's pulling out a magnet going, where's the disc?
Not everyone. Not everyone.
I've
Well,
got you
I
on this thumb drive, man. I'm going to kill you.
And on that uplifting note, we're going to.
And this is how you have the bad science, and we've now identified our bad scientist on the panel. The one that wants to be the evil genius.
I want to save everybody.
No.
I just want to save a select few.
Well, you don't have to interact with everybody.
So it's Charlie Kaufman. You can find me on Facebook under Kaiju Mapping. I've got some links to some of the talks I do about Godzilla, zombie, and Sharknado attacks, and I occasionally post funny science articles about weird things I find online. And I did almost break the internet talking about the South Carolina lizard man, but we tend not to talk about that. So.
I was really trying to encourage you to go that route, but we'll come back to that story one of these days.
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram under JCC_star guy. My business website's planetofmystery.com, and my personal blog is mindsetofthemodernmartian.net.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all as Les Gould Writes, where you can find out more about the things I write. I've got a new release that was coming out of Con Carolinas. It's a Monster Hunters series, the Lost Peterson Apostle. So there should be a release on that one coming up in a bit. But you can also find me at lesgould.com.
Yeah, you can find me at leannemmertel.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter a little bit. And I actually found out today that my next book in the Hands of Time series, The Dream Awakened, is going to be released on June 18th.
I know it's real subtle, but I'm at DarrenKennedy.com. I write these books, and come find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I
am Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, continualconvention.com, Con Carolinas, and I'm all over Facebook. Occasionally show up on Instagram, Twitter, all sorts of other places too. So I want to thank my panelists for spending the time, and hang around for the next panel and some more programming. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.